Hey y'all, welcome to the Courageous Joy panel that is part of the 45th Bay Area Playwrights Festival. We're brought together today by Playwrights Foundation, and we are going to spend about 45 minutes to an hour together on this panel investigating the role of joy and play in navigating the hardest experiences of life. So I invite you to witness this conversation between four really fascinating experts from different fields who tackle the depths of grief, the heights of joy, who are invested in healing and transformation. And we are so lucky to have them all here with us. I'll talk a little bit about why are we doing this panel in a festival of new plays. It's a festival of readings. We have 5 plays in the festival this year. And as we were putting together that roster of writers, we look at hundreds of scripts from hundreds of writers, and then we have a reading community of over 100 people who read the scripts to narrow down our selection process to the 5 pieces that we're going to support as they grow and develop their stories over this 2-week process. And what emerged out of that process of selection is 5 plays that are obsessed by resilience without erasure. These are characters who are going through grief and loss and facing challenges of historical legacy and oppression, and facing moments of personal transformation in the face of grief, and looking for connection and strength and joy through it all. The plays are luminous and bright and witty and fully felt and gorgeous and hopeful in the face of so much darkness and grief. And so we thought, well, let's have a conversation about that. How do grief and loss and the hardest times of life live alongside this fierce propulsion towards joy and play and happiness? So I'm going to invite in a moment 4 people who have really interesting lenses on that, and I hope that it deepens your experience of the plays in the festival if you're watching our readings. This weekend is the first weekend of the festival, so everything is at Potrero Stage in San Francisco. And next weekend, August 5th through 7th, everything will be in person in San Francisco and also streaming online. So if you're watching this online and you're not in SF, you can see all the plays that I'm going to be talking about a little bit later. But before we launch into our group conversation, I want to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge that Playwrights Foundation, the organization and institution that is bringing us all together and supporting this conversation, is located on the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who are the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. We are guests here and recognize that we benefit from living and working on their ancestral homeland. So I would love to encourage everyone watching to take a moment to introduce yourself and put the native land that you are currently watching from in the chat. This is a moment to think about where you are, what it means, how you got here, and maybe what you might be benefiting from in this moment. So take a second just to do that and acknowledge your native land if you know it. And if not, maybe wonder, how could you find out? I'm going to introduce myself too. My name is Megan Cohen. I'm a resident playwright at Playwrights Foundation. I'm in my 4th and final year of my residency here. And over my time being supported as an artist-fed institution, I've grown into a staff role here. I'm the communications and engagement manager. So I get to do fun panels like this too. And if you see us on social media, it's me, so say hello. I want to bring on our panelists now. They're going to fly in from all sides of the screen through the magic of the internet. And I'm going to introduce these folks one by one and ask them each a question, and then we'll have a nice open group conversation. First, I want to introduce Wendy Kessler. She is a grief educator and counselor. She's the brains behind @Grief Guide Counseling on Instagram. She's a hospice bereavement specialist and a grief counselor who believes that grief is not a problem to be fixed, but a journey towards healing and growth that we can learn to navigate. Wendy, if you ever get an email from Wendy, you will read it over and over again all week. I know that I did. This is something that Wendy emailed me. Wendy, you emailed me that grief and loss is the most universal experience that we share in this life, and yet it is the most misunderstood. Can you talk just very briefly 1 or 2 things that are misunderstood about grief that you might hope that folks might understand better?
Sure. And it's so interesting, just the topic of this whole panel conversation about grief and joy. And we tend to think of those as opposites when really grief is the journey that allows us to experience joy at deeper levels and to connect with each other in ways that may not be possible without the shared experience that we have of just how we experience, how we process, how we feel supported in loss. There's so much that's offered within grief to just be able to live a really meaningful life.
Beautifully said. Another thing that you mentioned in your note is that you believe our society is entering an era where grief will be more integrated into daily life as it always should have been. Can you say a word or two about that integration or why you think that might be happening now or soon?
Sure. Certainly the pandemic has so much to do with this. And, grief in the best of circumstances is an isolating experience for most people. And then with the pandemic and social isolation, we were literally grieving in isolation. And I think the weight of that created the situation where we can't deny our grief. We can't deny to stuff it down and shove it away isn't working, and it doesn't work in isolation. We have to face, I think we've really been confronted with having to reconcile and kind of wrestle with everything surrounding grief, as well, again, like using it as a way to find more connection with each other.
Fascinating. As you can see, we're so lucky to have Wendy with us. I want to introduce Yari Servas, who is a director, dramaturg, teaching artist, and also the creator of the Practical Somatics project. We are working with Yari in that capacity all through the festival and the rehearsal process. Our festival artists and staff are working with Yari to gain practical somatics tools for self-soothing and reducing overwhelm. And Yari, I'm going to quote a little bit from your Instagram post about playfulness. Yari has an amazing series of posts about the rules of play and sort of reinventing that approach. And you talk about playfulness being what makes life worth living. Yari wrote, as we get older, we're socialized out of play as if seriousness were a mark of maturity, but I don't think that's true. If grief helps us process our painful experiences in moments of heartache, playfulness helps us keep on living. She also says, our laughter is proof that they have not conquered us. Our laughter unifies us as playmates and allies. Our laughter strengthens us for our struggle ahead. Yari, you mentioned in this post that joy is our birthright. Can you talk a little bit about that and share some of that thinking behind it, the context for that statement? I think that's so powerful to think about. Joy is our birthright. Tell us a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, for me, that idea is so much connected to a practice of mindfulness. And my work, like as a somatic practitioner, is so much about creating space for us to become aware of what it feels like to breathe deeply and hear beautiful things and taste things that taste good and just enjoy the experience of being an alive body. And so for me, just like the simple fact of being alive is like proof that we get to experience how wonderful like the world is and celebrate that wonder and like curiosity and awe at the world together. I'm like a gardener. So every time I walk outside and like touch some dirt, I'm like, this is it. This is joy. Like, this is why I be alive.
Amazing. Yari, I know that the Practical Somatics Project kind of emerged during the pandemic or as a pandemic response. Could you tell us a little bit about how you came to be doing this side of your work right now?
Yeah, for sure. So in part, what I teach has come out of my own experience of developing a sense of like personal resilience. So full disclosure, I have an anxiety disorder. I think lots of people do. It's not that strange. But I'm also aware of the fact that lots of us in our youth were not taught just very simple skills that help us deal with emotional overwhelm, especially if you're like a sensitive kid. I was. And during the pandemic, I saw, so much anxiety and fear and worry of like the unknown and fear of losing people that we love. And it hurt me to like see my friends like suffering and sad and scared and not have the skills in order to deal with that. And so I created this project. I started like teaching these online workshops for folks as an opportunity to connect with one another, like over that experience, and then develop hard skills that we need in order to take care of ourselves better.
Amazing. Thank you so much for bringing all of that to us as like a member of our team behind the scenes at the festival, and also in this moment as a panelist for the public. Speaking of people who wear both those hats, I want to introduce Jaquetta Farrar. Jaquetta, you are so many things. She is an actress / writer / producer. She's also the artistic producer here at Playwrights Foundation, which means that if you're witnessing any piece of the festival, a lot of her labor and intelligence and insight and care went into making that possible. And among other things, Jaquetta is also the founder and CEO of a nonprofit called Dismantling Daughters, which I'm going to share just a little snippet of that kind of mission, purpose, vision statement. Dismantling Daughters describes itself as women helping women rebuild, repair, and realign themselves. It's a nonprofit organization focused on supporting women of color in urban areas by supporting an internal shift that lends them the opportunity to gain success in the world. Jaquetta, I wonder if you would give us a couple of words about how all of those things live together for you, your leadership work with your nonprofit and your work as a creator and producer. How does all of that fit together in the ways that you create connection?
Oh, marrying my passions, right? I think that is such a layered thing to do. So for me, honestly, Dismantling Daughters came about from a conversation about my own journey and what that looks like, right? And so as we talk about courageous joy, we talk about grief, we talk about how to process that grief, especially during times when we are isolated. I had to deal with me. What did that look like, right? What were those moments where I had to question myself and say, all right, I'm not living in my truth of my artistry or my creativity. Where am I not showing up for myself? How am I showing up for myself, and where can I do better? And kind of that's where all of this came about, because I know if this was my personal journey, how many other women were struggling or working through the same things, right? And how can we come through in a sisterhood or in a fellowship and community and build the necessary community that's needed for us to kind of pivot in the world post-COVID, which may never be a post-COVID, right? But the illusion of it, right, is kind of where we are. And like, great, where can we support each other? And not just women, but I strongly feel like we sometimes as women are the foundational structures of our communities. So if we're strong, so will our communities. But if we're not our best, we're not our strongest, then something is gonna kind of drop, right? Or break or bend. And we need us. We need us to be our best. And so that's kind of where all of it came together, and why it's important for me to be of support for someone else, because I have a village behind me that kind of has pushed me to this point of, you can do it. You know, the scariest parts, you can do it. You have everything you need within you. You can do it. So that's kind of how all of it came about.
Thank you. And I'm going to introduce the last member of our temporary village, our pop-up village right now, is Sarah Toby Moore. Toby is a actor, writer, clown, brought a chicken, so you know that they're the real deal. Um, incredible resume, Barnum, Bailey, Ringling Brothers, everything, and a really rigorous artistic practice of creating new work that's right at the boundaries of comfort. Honored to share with you all that Toby is an artistic alum of Playwrights Foundation. We've supported them as a playwright and are so pleased to be part of that ongoing journey. And we'll be sharing, everything that we hear about your work out to our community as you continue to make and remake your pieces. So I'm going to start by quoting a little something that you shared on your website and then asking you about it. This is something that Toby wrote. My first impulse has always been to defend my chosen art form and profession by screaming, "We're here to bring joy!" But this is only partially true. The truth is that all clowns aren't happy, cheery, red-nosed candy stripers. We're also here to stoke awareness, to invoke danger in order to avoid or overcome it, to tell stories of grace and survival, and also to take a crap on the bed of the self-righteous and run away screeching. Funny stuff, not always comfortably so. Toby, I wanted to ask you how that sort of sensibility is informing the current.
Really write that?
Yeah, you absolutely did.
I'm like,
I
wait a
wanted
minute.
to read it. I was like, this is beautifully put together,
That's probably from, is it The State of the Clown or that other essay? There's another one called Clown in the Time of COVID.
Yeah,
but The State of the Clown was written in response to, politics, basically. That all these morons in power, they kind of deserve, what we give them as comedians. And we couldn't have survived that dark time, the election of this fascist asshole, pardon me. And, the fact that we've had to go through all this cutting back of our rights. I mean, the only way we've gotten through it is with the comedians.
Yes.
The comedians have helped us get through it. So
Absolutely.
Anyway, sorry, I'm jumping the gun.
Please, it's as we're in this moment, I was just curious about any thoughts you have about what's specific about doing that work right now. Is there anything about surviving this moment through comedy and laughter and play that feels, inherently different? Or are we part of this long tradition of facing all these obstacles, with the same kind of resilience?
I think, I have to quote Mel Brooks on this, because it was Mel Brooks who said, if I cut my finger, that's tragic. But if I fall down an open sewer and die, that's comedy. There's something beautifully paradoxical about understanding all of this. And I feel like I am not at all the smartest person on this panel. You guys are such amazing practitioners, and you're all, your intellects. And I am literally an old clown from Jersey. And what I've done, I think my whole career is, because I have had a lot of personal tragedy. I've lost a lot of friends. I just lost one of my closest friends on Tuesday this past week, and had to do the dance where I had to go and identify him and get his wallet and his keys and all of this. And I have it all here. And I thought to myself, well, this is familiar territory. I'm sad and I'm crushed, but I know this landscape. And I think if you know a landscape and it's a common theme in your life, then as an artist, your job is to render that somehow. Render the radiance of it to the world, whether it's, tragic or comic or both. And if you can get both and have them work together, well, then you're allowed to be called a genius even for a moment, because it's very hard to do that. But it's really amazing when you have an audience that you can evoke from them both their sadness and then their laughter. And so that's my stock in trade, is I try to do that all the time. And, right before COVID, I was very lucky. In 2019 and the beginning of 2020, I had two very personal, very original pieces that went up in this town. And one was called Atomic Clown. Now it's called Atomic Comic. And it was about the triptych of hell that I went through, I lost my father. I lost my health because I got cancer and beat it. And then I lost my relationship. My marriage fell apart. And so and it got to the point where it was so much crap that it was funny. It became funny. I was like, come on, what else you got? Come on. And it became this thing of like, how I'm just going to write a play about it. I'm just going to do it. So I feel like, I don't know, we all have to find there's no escaping any of this. The tragedies are going to happen. The losses will happen. The grief happens. But, grief, Wendy, you could speak to this so much better than I, but it's like grief is really love. It's love. And that's why it hurts so much, because you miss the person, whatever the loss, whatever kind of loss it is, Anyway, I'm just rambling on and on, you guys. You need to just go quiet down. Or I can pass the baton. Otherwise, I'll sit here and, do this. And then nothing will make any sense.
Okay, that's the opposite of a problem. I think that joy gets thrown around a lot as a kind of abstract concept, the idea of joy or the pursuit of joy or the concept of joy. I'm curious from all of you, it can be really tangible in your practice, in your work. When joy shows up, how do you know? When joy is in the room with you, like, what does joy look like, feel like? What is joy when it shows up for you? How are you aware that it's there with you in a tangible way?
I think I can go for a second. I think those moments are the unexpected moments, right? Of like, you got your coffee for free, right? Because this is your favorite coffee shop and you are walking your dog and they only bought the lavender syrup because you're the only person who orders a lavender latte. That is joy, right? Because they remember you, they remember to have a treat for your dog. And it's the moment of awareness. Someone's aware of your presence. Someone is embracing you, right? And it's just that moment of bliss, of like, this is for me. This is special. I think I just loved everything Toby just said, right? And I'm a Jersey girl too, so I love it, right? And I get it. I get how grief is love. And we'll always have grief because it's a part of the process, the human experience. But those intricate moments of finding joy is also finding laughter in the grief of like, you can't make this up, right? So what are you going to do about it? Are you going to cry about it? Or are you going to find the little moments where you're like, oh my God, are you playing a joke on me, right? Or universe, and find that. So I think in my work, it's just the little moments of, I have no control in this moment. Let me not fight the universe, right? And let me just go with the process.
But right, it's these moments, it's these tiny moments of bliss, like the social workers at the hospital last week. They were wonderful, they were kind. They looked me in the eye. We had masks on, but like every little thing they did, I just looked at them and said, you people are angels. But it is all about that. Buying somebody a coffee who's, ahead behind you at Starbucks or whatever, it's gold. That's gold. Anyway, yeah.
One of the most surprising things for me when I started working in hospice 5 years ago is how much joy there is in our office. That there's so much laughter that happens amongst the hospice staff. We love to celebrate people's birthdays and make a big deal out of everything. And I think if you're really a melancholy person, hospice would be a hard gig to have long term. There really is something about being able to hold joy in the present moment while also engaging with grief and end of life work. And that a lot of what we're doing isn't so much, it is about helping people to die well, but it's also about helping people to live well. And we forget about that sometimes when we're talking about death, dying, grief, or grieving, that there's a huge piece of that that's about living. And how are we living as well as we can until our final moment? Like, how can we find a moment of joy even in the midst of this brokenness, and not seeing things so much as an either or, like I'm in grief or I'm in joy, but living in the both and. Like, I can be grieving and I can experience joy at the same time. I can be helping someone through a really hard moment and also experience just a sweet moment of laughter with a colleague. That it's not about having these compartments and living kind of in these separate parts of ourselves, but really the integration of living all of ourselves and all of life simultaneously, and then with each other as well.
Oh my gosh, I have my own thoughts, but I want to reflect a little bit on what I was hearing from three of y'all and like learning as the three of you were speaking. And what was bubbling up for me is this idea, this like felt like a recurring theme, that joy exists in this moment of genuine and generous human connection. That when it's like two people, like whatever can be happening around, like whatever shitstorm can be happening, but when two people are able to like make a little genuine and also generous, giving, like abundant connection with one another, with like free spirits, like that's where joy happens. I love that idea. I think in like a concrete, practical way, which is, I think, what you were asking, Megan, if I'm remembering correctly. For me, the way that joy looks when it appears in a tangible way is in the form of laughter, which is maybe a little obvious, but laughter specifically in a rehearsal room in the midst of like the 11th hour when there are 100 things that have gone wrong and so many things to fix, and everyone is like short on sleep, and the like anxiety level is high, the stakes are high. And when in that moment, in that like tense, tech room, rehearsal room, we're able to like laugh together at something silly and a little bit meaningless, that for me, like that's what joy looks like. In the midst of all of this, we can still give ourselves space to like breathe a little bit and enjoy things that are like silly just for the sake of having enjoyed them.
Absolutely. And so much of the beauty of theater is artists creating and framing those moments of connection so that we can all live in them and witness them together and share them and build them. And the plays this year do such a beautiful job, whether it's the siblings in an Arab Spring, or Arab Spring by Demo Abraham is very much about siblings creating what she calls a personal revolution coming out of grief. Being pulled closer together in that moment. Saturday Morning Cartoons by Erasure and Riley, who's also a Jersey girl and very proud of it, is about families grappling with loss and change and trying to figure out what those best moments look like for nearing the end of life for an elderly relative, and How to Let Your Lover Die is also about how to have that best living that you can have in the time that you have, and how community connection supports that. A jumping off point by Inda Craig Galvan is really interesting. It takes this moment of sort of wrestling with historical oppression and the stealing of narratives and the stealing of stories and tales, and trying to find a way to get through that isolation into a connection that's going to lead to growth, that's going to lead to something more than the pain of that legacy. And I'm so curious about the possibilities of connection that honesty about grief creates. So many of these plays are about finding that moment of honesty so there can be that real connection. And I would love to hear from any or all of you. What are some moments of deepened connection that honesty has made possible in your own work or your own life? Casual, low-key, friendly, just grabbing a coffee kind of Zoom question, right? But what moments of connection has honesty around grief or around joy or around their intermingling made possible for you?
Hi, similar to what Yari had said about, we don't always grow up learning how to manage anxiety. I think it's the same. Grief is very similar. We don't grow up learning how to manage grief. We don't grow up, many of us don't see that around us in healthy ways. And so as adults, we can kind of take on this idea that as an adult, I need to be okay. I need to seem like I'm fine. I need to have it all together. I need to seem like I can handle this. And so the moment when that honesty happens in conversation between two people, when two people can really like let their guard down and be vulnerable and share, like with authenticity, like the pain and the hurt that they feel, the brokenness that they've experienced. There is just so much, there's so much power in just saying, you know, I've experienced something similar or a similar loss, or, you know, grief isn't fixed, it's witnessed. That's something I say a lot. Like, we can't fix each other. That's not, grief support is not about trying to fix each other's pains. Like we all own that ourselves, but there's a lot of power in witnessing each other's pain and listening to each other's story and just walking alongside each other, through a really hard situation. So honesty is so key to being able to share that connection where we can witness each other and what we're experiencing. And I think it's really hard to find a sense of healing apart from that witness that only comes through when we can honestly share and talk about what we're experiencing.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I think the most powerful plays, I mean, the most powerful theater, I mean, is what you were just talking about, Wendy, really is like the definition of courageous joy. That's the definition of it. I mean, I think, you know, if you can find anything in the sadness that opens you as a poet, and I think grief turns all of us into poets, you know. So you become so raw and real. And if you can take a moment as a playwright to record that, like, you know, keep journals, you know, map your courageous joy, map your courageous grief, and then build fictional. What I do is build fictionalized versions of myself and everybody else, and write them all into these scripts, which is exactly what it seems your playwrights have done this year. And we need it. So this idea that
Oh no, has the internet disconnected
to
us?
cry, we need one of the most incredible shit. I'm going to turn my camera off. Okay. And that's me dancing with a IV pole, actually. that's from Atomic Clown. Anyway, but I was saying, like, you know, we all become very raw and real when we're grieving, and if we can find a moment as artists to record that, you know, keep your journals, pull from that, put those into plays, and as your playwrights have done, and we need it. We need to cry as much as we need to laugh. And again, if you can get that golden thing where you're right in the middle and you're crying and laughing at the same time, then you're in Joni Mitchell territory, you know? So.
Yeah, I think I can jump in a bit. I think for me, everything starts with self. So as we think of the power of human connection, we also have to say there's power in connecting with yourself first. If you are more aware of where grief lies and where all of that is in your body, like trauma, right? And these experiences, when you are able to communicate with yourself that you are experiencing grief, you can then have that human moment where you can connect with someone else. And that's where the power lies, right? It doesn't lie just in the connectivity of you and someone else, but who am I? Where am I? What am I processing in the moment that is happening to me or around me? And where my presence lies within that, and just being honest. And I think a lot of times we as people, when we're going through grief, we're not honest about going through grief. We want to just process it. We want it to just hurry up. We want to just say, this isn't happening. This isn't real. I don't want to sit in it to say that it's here. We don't want to accept it. But the moment you accept it is the moment you can have that vulnerability with someone else and then create that powerful connection and say, oh, you know, in passing, I understand where you're coming from. I may not have the same experience, right? But I understand what grief looks like. I understand what sadness looks like. I understand what pain looks like, or even depression, right? Or having anxiety. You can now resonate with each other differently, even if you don't have the same exact experience, but you only can do that after you've acknowledged it within yourself. That's it.
Yeah, I really resonate with everything you just said, Jaquetta, and I want to respond a little bit to it. That like this idea that we can't truly be honest with other people unless we're honest with ourselves first. And it makes me think of how I mean I'm guilty of this absolutely in my life. I'm sure all of us are. Of not being dishonest with myself that I'm like experiencing something that feels like big and scary. I'm sure many of us in the room have had that experience. And I think what's an interesting thing, even useful thing perhaps, that came out of the experience of COVID is that we, in staying at home, we were like unable to distract ourselves with all of the things that like leave us the room to keep being dishonest, to keep ignoring whatever grief we might be experiencing. And then, you know, this like crazy event happened and everyone has to stay home, and we found ourselves, at least I did, you know, stuck with like all these thoughts and perceptions of myself and bad like personal habits that I didn't realize I had, and all of these like coping mechanisms that weren't necessarily useful. And I needed to be honest with myself about that truth before I could take care of myself better and then take care of other people around me better too. So yeah, I don't know. That's just what you made me think of, Jaquetta. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. This idea of connection coming from honesty and from self-knowledge and self-awareness so that you can offer that in relationship. The play Close to Home by Sharifa Yasmin, which is in our festival this year, it's very much about finding that connection between people who might be perceived from the outside as having big barriers between them, but they share that commitment to self-honesty that ultimately, you know, creates the possibility for unity and for chosen family and for the sense of the power of human connection, not just being between a pair of individuals, but in a constellation of people. I wonder if any or all of you could speak a little bit to the role of community, which is also really central to How to Let Your Lover Die. Is very much about care communities around end of life, that it's not just about this person, it's about, you know, the ecosystem of love around each of us and between all of us. I would love to know some of your thoughts about the role of community in grief and joy and their mixture. What does it look like for that to be this larger shared communal experience, whether it's societal, like maybe we're grappling with right now, we're not grappling with as much as we could be, or whether it's, you know, a unit of a group of people living in the same place or sharing an experience. What do grief and joy look like in community?
I think I'll jump in for a second. Love, right? Like if we are thinking about the foundation or what's at the basis and the core of grief, we acknowledge that it's love, but so is joy, right? It's whatever love we're feeling in a moment, but love is the foundation of all things for me, right? This is just my personal thoughts on all feelings come from love. So any sadness you feel comes from the lack of something, or you feeling like there's a lack of love, and happiness feels like there's abundance of love. So I think when it comes to community, we're looking at the core being love, right? And so you can process grief with a community because you can process that everyone in that space is providing love to you, right? They're providing a safe space for you to open up and be your most vulnerable self, your most chaotic self. And you can also trust that you can experience your joy with them because that's your most vulnerability as well, right? You can't truly be joyful if you're not comfortable in the space because you're always alert. But if you can release that alertness, right, and you can just be in space, you can experience both grief and joy simultaneously in a community and always know that you're safe to do so. And that's just my tidbit on that.
A good friend of mine who she's a hospice nurse and she's from Uganda. And I asked her once, what was her experience with grief growing up in Uganda? What was that like? And how does it differ from here? And, one of the things she shared with me that has stuck with me, it just was so beautiful that as a very young child, her mother taught her that when someone had lost, like an immediate family member had died, they would wear a piece of bark cloth somewhere on their body. And bark cloth was the same material they used to wrap bodies for burial. And so someone would wear a piece of bark cloth in their hair or some like pinned to their clothes somewhere. And so her mother had always taught her, when you see someone with bark cloth, you go up to them and you say, "I'm so sorry for your loss." And it's so opposite to how we encounter grief societally here, because it's on the griever to go to the community and to tell the community that they need help or support, or that they lost someone really dear to them, which again just increases this whole experience of isolation for grief. And how beautiful if that was flipped, that as a community, we reached out to grievers and made space for them to talk openly and to receive support for loss and for grief. And because there is, again, just so much healing that happens in having our pain witnessed and in being able to share a story or share the name of our loved one. And when we're not allowed to do that, it really increases the complication of grief that people experience. And it's just, we are wired for grief to be a communal experience. So I'm gonna stop there because I'll get on a roll and I'll keep talking for the next 15 minutes.
Yeah, I really, that made me think of Filipino tradition actually around burials. Right? Like there's so many other like global traditions around grief that are really community based. And this is just, the one that I've experienced. So it came to mind. So for example, like when my grandmother died, when my nung died, we had an open casket and it was in the house in like the farmhouse in the province for a full week. And then everyone in the town would come with flowers and candles, and they would lay things, and they would speak to like the family of the bereaved, and they would bring food. And it like is such a community affair. It's a full week opportunity for everyone in the town to like come and like be with the people of, the family member who had passed. And then at the end of that week, everyone gathers. Everyone gathers in front of the house as a casket is like walked out the front door and then walked all the way across town to the graveyard, and everyone marches together behind this casket. And it was, like heartbreaking and sad, but also so fortifying to be surrounded by like 100 bodies of people who like knew this person and loved them in life. And it made the event so much easier to bear for that reason, to like be surrounded by people. I wish we had more of that in our American tradition. It's really important. Yeah, it also makes me think of the way that breath work works. If anyone is familiar, the way that we learn self-soothing skills in the beginning of our life is from our caretakers. So that could be like parents or, grandparents, whatever caretaker happens to like be caring for you as an infant. And infants can't regulate. They don't have emotional regulation. They don't. They need something, they cry. And so their caregiver is the one who passes on those skills of being able to self-soothe. And so just this, this simple fact, calm bodies calm other bodies. And so, I don't know, for me, that like puts even more stark importance on how essential it is for us to surround one another when we are in pain, because when we process it together, we help one another move past that pain as well.
Beautifully said. As we careen into our final minutes as a temporary community, I want to ask you all one last question. If there's somebody watching this right now who maybe is a little bit deep or mired in the grief or in the isolation of this moment, they're going through some of the hard stuff, and they're hoping to tap into some of that ferocity of joy, of play, of love, of connection. Do you have any advice for them for how to find that, how to get to that, how to unlock that in themselves so that they can connect over it if somebody's mired in the grief and looking for the rest of it? What might you tell them?
I think my process is patience and grace. I've been like forcing that on myself, and I've kind of been extending that same thing to other folks, right? Of when we're in this rush to rush the process of anything, something gets missed and we end up having to start over. But allow yourself the patience and grace, right? And give yourself an extended time. It is your time to process. It is not my time. It is not somebody else's time. What you can handle is on you, right? And so your process has to be honored every step of the way. Now, you should also know that just because you're grieving does not mean you can't laugh, you can't smile, and you can't experience the little intricate things that you see along your pathway, right? Something as simple as a flower makes me smile because I love to see nature and I love to see things bloom, right? And that works. Find something to grow whenever you're grieving. If you have, find a plant, find a flower, plant something. I think if I can give you anything, plant something and just watch it grow, and you'll see kind of the circle of life, like, and how life works. And it helps you get out of those grievances where you don't feel like you can smile and laugh and be happy during sadness, but you can have all of those emotions all in one. I'm an emotional person. I'm a water sign. I go through all these emotions every day, right? Something that makes me sad, I will find laughter in at the same time. I hate traffic. It makes me sad, right? I feel like I'm stuck. But in the same process, I laugh and I find things to laugh at because I can't control it, right? This is just a part of life. So it's just those little things. If I can extend that or say anything, it would be just to find that and extend yourself patience and grace.
Well, I just wrote down everything you said, and I'm going to write down whatever the rest of you say because I'm in it right now. I look and I'm laughing because it's just so. I mean, this wasn't supposed to happen. Patrick wasn't supposed to die. I mean, it was just completely. But here's the thing, it is all tied. It's all woven together. It's part of life. There's no, am also a water sign person, and it's like and I'm spiritual. I believe that there's more to life than life. That's one of the best lines I ever wrote into any play. There's more to life than life. Like, you're going to go on from here. This is a costume we're in. That's what I believe. So, yeah, but I'm going to go buy some plants. I'm definitely going to buy some plants. And I don't have any. I don't have a cat or a dog. So I've got to get some life in here. But I would say also, I'll piggyback on the laughter thing. Laughing really does help, because it also generates tears. If you make yourself laugh hard enough, you'll cry. And if you cry hard enough, eventually you're going to laugh, because it's just, life is such folly. But walk, read, have good martinis, write everything down, talk people's ears off. And something my other best friend today just said to me, he said, don't shame yourself. If you need to not teach, if you can't work, then just don't work. And just let yourself be, because eventually you're going to write your way out of it, or you're going to find a way to take this practical magic basically and push it into a play or a piece of music or a poem or something. And I think it's safe to say that most of the people here, in our playwrights world, we're always looking for, everything is copy. Isn't that what Nora Ephron said? Everything is copy. So write it down. Take your broken heart, make it into art, and be fearless. People want to hear these stories. They need them. The clown has spoken.
Oh, Toby, I love everything you said. And I was thinking something similar, just that we need to give ourselves permission to feel joy when we're grieving. That a lot of times we limit ourselves and we feel like I shouldn't be happy because I want to honor this person I love who isn't here anymore. But to give ourselves permission to feel joy, even in the midst of grief. And we are the worst at judging our own feelings. And so to just not judge our feelings, but just give ourselves permission to feel how we feel without restriction. We kind of decide I should feel this way and I should feel this way for this long and to this intensity. And we overthink and we make decisions about how we should be with grief and joy, and just to give ourselves permission to be present in the moment of how we are and let multiple things exist at the same time, and to speak to ourselves the same way we would talk to a friend.
Yeah, I second that. I think like self-compassion, when I have been in like places of deep grief, self-compassion has really always been a constant tool in pulling me out of those places, because there are a million different ways to grieve, and every person might need to grieve in a different way. I mean, like globally, there's like so many different cultural ways of grieving, and so in order to really understand what like you, the individual, me, the individual, whomever needs in order to process grief, we need to like sit with self-awareness and also some self-compassion, so that we can understand where we're at and what kind of connection is going to help move us through a given moment. Yeah. Self-compassion. We can be kinder to ourselves, always.
I'll second that. I'm going to put it on a bumper sticker. I want to thank all of our panelists for coming and connecting and telling truth today. And I want to invite everybody watching that if you are hungry for truth, if you're hungry for connection, go to art, make art, be part of art. Playwrights Foundation is one place that you can come see new stories that are growing to become those experiences that we all need so desperately and so fully to connect with each other and witness together. You can always find out what's going on at playwrightsfoundation.org. Whether you're able to join us for the festival this year in our upcoming weekend, August 5th through 7th, or whether you're watching from the future, we always have something going on. We always have interesting artists. So playwrightsfoundation.org, and support the truth tellers in your community. Tell your truth, express yourself. I hope that you have gained as much heart and love and wisdom from these people as I have in this brief time together. And I want to thank you for taking your time and attention and generously sharing it with all of us. I think that's it. Other than just, sending my heart through the screen to these four lovely people in their own rooms as we create connection in this time of isolation through the magic of technology. Everybody wave goodbye as we cut the stream. Bye.